I used to tell everyone that I would only love one person and marry once in my life. But then I walked in on my wife passionately kissing her ex while a crowd of people cheered them on. Others joked about me catching them, but she was so sure of my trust and my inability to understand French that she didn't think I would ever suspect a thing. Standing outside the door, I felt like my heart had been shredded as I gripped the hangover pills I had brought for her, all the warmth I felt for her turning to ice. I stopped feeding myself lies and began quietly erasing every trace of our life together, knowing that in 1 month, I would be gone from her life forever. At the company gala, Ava's old classmate from her time in France, Ethan Richardson, suddenly put her on the spot with a question. If I had moved back to the States with you back then, would I be the one standing here as your husband today? Ava didn't give him a straight answer and instead brushed it off with a vague comment, assuming that I couldn't understand a word of their French. What she didn't realize was that I had spent months teaching myself French just so I could surprise her during her semester in Paris. Yet every time I mentioned visiting her, she would shut me down and even went as far as explicitly forbidding me from coming over. I stared at the two of them for a moment before picking up my glass and offering a toast in perfectly fluent French. In that case, I wish you two lovers a happy ending and a long life together. Ava was completely stunned and asked if I actually spoke French. I downed my drink in one go and smiled as I told her I had started learning the year she moved abroad, but since I never had the chance to use it, I probably wouldn't bother with it anymore. Ava was visibly shaken by my response. Ava had been chatting away in fluent French with her old classmate, looking more animated than she had in months. She was even carefully plating fruit for me, yet she failed to notice that my eyes were beginning to sting with tears. Because she was so convinced I was clueless about the language, she felt perfectly comfortable pouring her heart out to her ex right in front of me. She had no idea that I had spent years learning new languages just to stay connected to her world, and by now I was actually fluent in 5 of them. Every single word she whispered to Ethan in French was crystal clear to me, including the intimate parts she thought were our little secret. Playing the part of the oblivious husband, I asked them what they were talking about. She gave a dismissive little laugh and told me they were just catching up on work-related matters. In reality, their conversation had long since drifted from business to their past relationship and even to the mysteries of the universe, with their connection growing deeper by the second. When it came to me, however, she was always dismissive and clearly lacked any patience. Whenever I tried to watch the sunset with her, she complained that it was an absolute waste of time and incredibly boring. Yet when Ethan sent her a random photo of a stray cat, she spent over an hour gushing about how adorable it was. It turned out that she had been treating me like an idiot this entire time, feeding me lies just to keep me quiet. I had a secret of my own, though, because in exactly 1 month, I was being transferred to London for a high-level undercover operation. Once I left, there was absolutely nothing Ava could do to track me down. I looked at this woman I had loved for 2 decades, and while her face still had that same familiar beauty, her soul felt completely different. The person standing before me had become a complete stranger. All at once, the weight of the deception made everything feel pointless, and I realized I had no desire to keep playing along with this pathetic charade. I made up an excuse about having a deadline to meet and stood up to leave, and Ava immediately followed suit. She told the group that they should call a night because she wanted to go home and help her husband with his project. Her old friends groaned and complained that they had barely started catching up, asking why they had to leave so early. Ethan chimed in as well, telling her that since it was so rare for them to be together, she should stay just a little longer. I noticed the hesitation in Ava's eyes, so I just gave a small, forced smile and told her to stay and enjoy herself while I headed back alone. Before she could even get a word out, I let go of her hand and walked out the door without looking back. After I left the lounge, I walked down to the parking garage and got into my car, ready to head home. That was when I realized the hangover pills I had bought for Ava were still sitting in my pocket. She was never good at handling her liquor, and I had been worried that the others would keep pushing drinks on her. I decided I should still give them to her, so I got out of the car and headed back up to the room. As I reached the door, I could hear the sound of rowdy laughter and cheering coming from inside. Driven by a dark curiosity, I peered through the small crack in the door to see what was happening. Ava and Ethan were leaning in close, their lips pressed together with nothing but a thin strip of paper between them. Ava's pale face was flushed deep red, while Ethan's eyes were filled with an intense, burning desire. Amidst the loud cheering of the crowd, the paper eventually fluttered to the floor. Ethan reached out to cup the back of her head and pulled her into a deep, aggressive kiss. My breath hitched as if the air had been sucked out of the room, and I felt a crushing weight settle on my chest. A wave of agonizing pain washed over me, leaving me breathless. Someone in the group shouted out through the laughter, asking Ava if she was worried about me catching her. Ava finally pulled back and laughed, saying that she wasn't worried because I trusted her far too much to ever suspect anything. She added that I would never find out anyway since she and Ethan always spoke in French, a language she was certain I couldn't understand. The people around them teased that they were incredibly bold, noting that everyone thought Ava and I had a perfect, wholesome marriage, only to find out she was the one straying. Ava tilted her head back and drained her glass, claiming she still loved me, but argued that a person can't be expected to only love one person forever, especially after being with the same man for so many years. She insisted that what she was doing was perfectly normal, and as long as she kept it a secret from me, everything would be fine. Her little speech sent the party into a frenzy, and someone suggested they start a game of truth or dare. They all took turns spinning a bottle on the table, and whoever it pointed at had to answer a question honestly. After a few rounds, the bottle finally landed on Ava. One of her friends asked with a smirk whether she had actually developed real feelings for Ethan during their 3 years together in France. Ava didn't even hesitate before smiling and admitting that she had truly loved him. Her friend pushed further, asking her who she loved more now, me or Ethan. Ava looked down and took a slow sip of her wine, but her eyes never left Ethan's, leaving her answer hanging in the air. Standing there in the hallway, watching the betrayal unfold, I felt as if my heart were being ripped out of my chest. It felt like there was a gaping, bloody wound where my heart used to be, and the pain was unbearable. My mind flashed back to our wedding day 8 years ago. I remembered how beautiful she looked in her white dress, holding her bouquet as she walked down the aisle toward me. She had the most beautiful smile on her face, and her dimples were as charming as ever. In that moment, I truly believed I was the luckiest man in the entire world. I had held her hand high in front of our families and proudly announced that I was finally marrying the love of my life. She had tears in her eyes then, promising to spend the rest of her life by my side. But after only 8 years, the woman who once made me feel like a king had become the person who stripped me of everything I held dear. I couldn't bear to watch another second of it, so I turned to walk away. As I turned around, I nearly collided with a waiter who was bringing more drinks into the room. I put a finger to my lips and whispered for him to be quiet, telling him that my wife was inside with another man and that I was just gathering evidence, so he shouldn't mention I was there. I gave him a firm look as I spoke. The waiter was just a kid, and the look he gave me was one of pure pity and discomfort. It seemed like he understood the humiliation I was feeling all too well. Once I was sure he wouldn't say anything, I felt a small sense of relief and walked away. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and took a deep breath to steady myself before heading back down to the parking garage. I started the car and drove straight to the old neighborhood where Ava and I had spent our childhoods. As everyone's lives improved over the years, people eventually moved away to better places. Now, the old neighborhood was nothing but a silent, desolate shadow of what it used to be. I sat on the front steps for a long time, lost in my own thoughts as the world blurred around me. I could almost see her as a little girl with pigtails, holding my face in her hands and promising to stay with me forever. She had told me that I was the only man she would ever love. She used to say that we had to be together forever because she couldn't imagine life without me. Ava, since you decided to break your promise, you're going to have to face the consequences. I've decided to let you feel the weight of your choices. In 1 month's time, you will never see my face again. I stayed in that old courtyard until late into the night before finally making my way home. The house was pitch black when I walked in, and when I checked my phone, there wasn't a single text or missed call from her. I gave a bitter, self-deprecating laugh and just decided to turn the phone off altogether. I took a hot shower and climbed into bed, letting the mattress swallow me up as I drifted into a heavy sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night when I felt the bed dip, and then I felt her arms wrapped tightly around me from behind. Ava reeked of alcohol as she whispered in my ear, apologizing for staying out so late and saying she had just gotten carried away with her old friends. I asked her in a flat, emotionless voice why she hadn't called me to come get her. She squeezed me tighter and said that Ethan lived nearby and had just dropped her off on his way home, claiming she didn't want to wake me up. I just gave a non-committal grunt and pried her fingers off of me before turning over to face the other way. I realized she had already fallen asleep, her eyes shut tight, but I couldn't help but notice the dark bruises on her neck that were clearly hickeys. The marks seemed to pulse with her heartbeat, almost as if Ethan were using her body to mock me. Any hope of sleep was gone, so I got up and went to the living room to light a cigarette. I watched the smoke drift for a moment before reflexively putting the cigarette out. Ava had terrible allergies and couldn't stand the smell of smoke, so I had forced myself to quit a 10-year habit just for her. But sitting there in the dark, I realized there was no longer any reason to keep making sacrifices for her. Ava, you really aren't worth the effort anymore. I sat back on the couch and smoked one cigarette after another as my mind drifted back to our college years. There was a girl back then who wouldn't stop pursuing me, and when Ava found out, she started making sure she looked perfect every day and never let go of my arm. She would deliberately walk me past the other girl's dorm just to make a point. She would hold her head high and tell the girl right to her face that I was her boyfriend and future husband, and that she didn't stand a chance. She was so vibrant and full of life back then, with a light that seemed to draw everyone toward her. It was impossible not to fall in love with a woman like that. I don't know exactly what happened, but the girl who once looked at me like I was her whole world had slowly vanished. She had grown into a sophisticated and beautiful woman, but she had lost the fierce and honest love she once had for me. The next morning, I was woken up by the sound of someone clattering around in the kitchen. I opened my eyes to see Ava wearing an apron and working away at the stove. It caught me off guard because in all the years we'd been married, Ava had almost never set foot in the kitchen. I knew she hated the way the cooking smells lingered on her skin and hair, so I had always taken care of the meals myself. I wondered for a moment if she was feeling guilty and trying to make it up to me. I got out of bed and stepped over the pile of cigarette butts on the floor before heading into the kitchen. By the time I walked in, she was already pouring some fresh seafood porridge into a thermos. She barely looked up from what she was doing as she asked why I had ended up on the couch the night before. She told me she had to head out soon to take some porridge to Ethan, claiming he had a rough night and needed something easy on his stomach. Sensing the tension, she glanced at the empty pot and sheepishly added that since it was her first time making porridge, she hadn't made enough for both of us, so I'd have to find something else for breakfast. Before I could even respond, she grabbed the thermos and hurried out of the kitchen. She stopped in her tracks when she saw the mess of cigarette butts scattered on the living room floor. She turned back to look at me, her expression unreadable for a moment. She chided me, saying she had told me 1,000 times how much she hated the smell of smoke and that I was being difficult. She told me that as a punishment, she wouldn't be seeing me for the next few days. She gave me a playful pout before breaking into a soft laugh. She told me not to worry and explained that her project at work was in its final stages, meaning everyone was working late, but promised to make it up to me once things settled down. As she spoke, she stepped into her shoes by the front door. She asked if I still wanted to take that trip to Boston, promising to take 2 weeks off next month so we could finally go together. Before I could say a word, she was out the door and the lock clicked shut behind her. Next month? Ava, there's no such thing as next month for us. I didn't see Ava a single time during the following week. She would wait until I was at work to come by the house and grab a few changes of clothes. I didn't ask where she was staying, but I didn't have to because Ethan was posting updates on Facebook constantly. There were photos of Ava cooking soup for him. There were pictures of a tipsy Ava singing karaoke to him in front of a crowd. He even posted videos of her dancing in a summer dress, clearly doing everything she could to make him laugh. Every single post was a blatant display of Ava's affection and her clear preference for him over me. I never liked or commented on any of it, choosing instead to act as if I hadn't seen a thing. I had more important things to focus on anyway, and with only a week left before my deployment, I began systematically erasing any sign that I had ever lived in that house. On the first day, while Ava was busy cooking for Ethan, I took all the handwritten meal plans and recipes I had made for her and ran them through the paper shredder. On the second day, while she was serenading him at the bar, I gathered every letter and card we had ever exchanged and burned them in the fireplace. On the third day, as she was lost in Ethan's arms under the moonlight, I took our wedding rings down to the pier and tossed them into the ocean. By the time my departure date arrived, Ava finally showed up at the house looking completely exhausted. She looked around the bedroom and commented that the house seemed unusually empty. I gave her a casual look and told her that I'd just been decluttering to make the place feel a bit more open. I added that there was no point in holding on to things that didn't matter anymore. She seemed to think I was just talking about spring cleaning, but I could still see a flicker of unease in her eyes. She took my arm and smiled, telling me how much she appreciated everything I had done for her over the years despite my busy work schedule. She promised to make it up to me as soon as her current project was finished. Just then, my phone buzzed with a new notification. Ava glanced at the screen and asked me what had just been successfully processed. My heart skipped a beat as I grabbed the phone and flipped it face down on a mattress before she could see anything else. Luckily, I had changed my passcode, so she was only able to catch a glimpse of the notification header. I forced myself to stay calm and lied that it was just a confirmation for a membership at a new bakery down the street, promising to bring her some treats later. Ava seemed satisfied with that answer and leaned into me, playfully asking if I could guess what she had brought home for me. I thought for a second and guessed that she had brought some chicken wraps from that deli we used to go to. Ava's eyes lit up with surprise as she asked how I could have possibly known. Of course I knew. Back in college, Ava was involved in so many clubs that she was always around other guys, and I used to get incredibly jealous whenever I saw them together. To make it up to me after one of our fights, she had once missed 3 buses in a row just to wait in line for those specific chicken wraps. The moment she showed up with the warm food, all my anger had simply melted away. She had held my face and teased me about how easy I was to please as long as there was good food involved. I had pouted and told her that it wasn't about the food, but rather that I loved her enough to let things go. I had warned her then that if I ever stopped loving her, nothing she did would ever be enough to win me back. I had been half joking at the time, but I meant every word of it. Now, she was trying to use that same old trick to get back into my good graces. But this time, I wasn't going to give her that chance. Ava pulled the container of wraps from behind her back and presented them to me with a smile, saying she knew she could never hide food from me. She joked that I was always the first one in the kitchen the moment I smelled something good. I looked into her eyes and gave a sad smile, telling her that she was right and that I always knew exactly what she was thinking. My words seemed to strike a chord because she suddenly looked away and started to stammer my name. Seeing her so flustered actually made me want to laugh, so I just took the food from her and set it on a nightstand. I reached into the drawer and pulled out a beautifully wrapped gift box for her. Her face lit up with excitement as she asked what was inside. I stopped her before she could open it, telling her it was a gift for our 8th anniversary and that she had to wait until the actual day to see it. Ava agreed and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, promising to wait until our anniversary to open it. Then she paused and asked why I was giving it to her now when our anniversary was still 2 days away. I told her that I was worried she would be too busy on the actual day, so I wanted to make sure she had it now. Ava smiled warmly and told me to just be patient for a little longer, promising that once her project was over, she would be by my side every single day. I couldn't stand her acting anymore, so I got up and headed to the bathroom to get ready for the day. When I came out, Ava was dressed in a stunning green dress and had her makeup done perfectly, looking more radiant than ever. I gave her a quick glance and asked what her plans were for the day. She reached into her jewelry box and pulled out the expensive necklace my mother had given her for our wedding, a piece she hadn't worn since the day we said our vows. She saw the look on my face in the mirror and asked me to help her put it on while she explained her plans. She told me that one of her major clients was having a birthday party and that since it was a formal event, she had to pull out all the stops. Of course, I knew better since I had just seen Ethan's post on Twitter saying that today was his birthday. I gave a dry smile and agreed that it was indeed an important occasion and that she should definitely look her best. Maybe she sensed something in my tone because she suddenly turned around and threw her arms around me, promising not to drink too much and to come home early. I gently pushed her back and forced a smile, telling her to go have a good time and not to let anything distract her from her important business. Seeing me smile seemed to put her at ease, and she headed out the door with a confident sway in her step. I watched her walk away until she was out of sight, and then let out a long breath, wiping away a stray tear before turning to grab my bags. I took one last look at the house we had shared for 8 years and knew that it was time to say goodbye to it forever. I pulled out my phone and went through every single one of Ethan's Facebook posts from the last month, taking screenshots of everything. I even managed to get the ones he had marked as private and sent the whole lot to Ava's phone. I included a message telling her that I had actually learned French during her first year abroad just for her, but that I wouldn't be needing the language anymore. I told her that if she wanted to be with Ethan, I wasn't going to stand in her way, and I wished them both the best of luck. I pulled the SIM card out of my phone and tossed it into the trash along with the cold chicken wraps before walking out the door for the last time. From that moment on, Ava was no longer a part of my life. After a long flight, I finally landed in London, ready to start a completely new chapter of my life. I wasn't there for romance. I was there to lose myself in my work. I was finally going to become the man I wanted to be and start living for myself for a change. I had been assigned to the team as a lead engineer on a 5-year research project. While I was settling into my new life, Ava was back in Chicago attending Ethan's birthday party. She had brought him a small, beautifully wrapped gift and made a big show of giving him a lucky charm she'd gotten from a temple. She told him she knew he had everything he could ever want, so she had gone to get him something meaningful to ensure his future was bright. She even claimed she had prayed for his well-being, insisting that her blessing was the most valuable gift she could give. Ethan didn't wait for her to finish before pulling her into a tight embrace, as if he wanted to never let her go. The mood was perfect, and he leaned down to kiss her. For the first time, Ava didn't feel the thrill of being with him, and instead, she felt a strange, dull ache in her chest. She had a sinking feeling that something terrible was about to happen. She pushed him away and hurried to the restroom, where she stood staring at her reflection in the mirror for a long time. She tried to convince herself that as long as she was careful, I would never find out what she was doing. She justified her actions by remembering that she had also gotten a charm for me while she was at the temple for Ethan. She told herself that she loved me just as much as she loved Ethan. Despite the lies she told herself, the feeling of dread in her gut only seemed to grow stronger. Ethan noticed her distraction and asked her what was wrong. Ethan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, leaning in to whisper in her ear. His hands began to wander, pulling her closer to him. It wasn't until she felt him tugging at her dress that she finally snapped out of it and shoved him away. She told him to stop and insisted that she had to get home because she had promised to be there for me. Ethan looked hurt and asked her if she could just stay for a little longer, especially since it was his birthday. He promised that if she stayed, he wouldn't bother her again unless she wanted him to. A single tear fell from his eye and rolled down her skin, and for some reason, that small gesture affected her more than any kiss ever could. Once again, she found herself torn between her two lives. An hour later, she fixed her makeup and took a quick shower to wash away any trace of him before heading home. When she walked into the house, she was immediately struck by the eerie silence. She called out my name as she walked through the door. The only thing that greeted her was the cold, empty air of a vacant house. In that moment, a real sense of panic began to set in. She turned on every light in the house and eventually noticed the container of chicken wraps sitting unopened in the trash can. Her legs gave out and she collapsed to the floor, sobbing and begging me to stop playing games and just come out. She apologized for being late again and promised that she would never break her word to me ever again. She begged me to just show myself and promised to change her ways. But there was no one there to hear her, and the house remained silent. She tried to convince herself that I would never actually leave her. She figured I was just incredibly angry and was trying to teach her a lesson by hiding. She kept telling herself that until her eyes fell on the gift box I had left on the table. Completely forgetting my instructions to wait, she frantically tore the wrapping paper off of the box. Inside the box, she found 2 copies of a divorce agreement, both already signed by me. I hadn't asked for a single asset, leaving everything to her in exchange for my freedom. I had walked away with nothing but my independence. She gripped the papers so hard that her knuckles turned white. She began to shake violently and had to grab onto the table to keep from falling over. She couldn't understand how this was happening, convinced that I loved her far too much to ever ask for a divorce. She was certain she had hidden her tracks perfectly and that there was no way I could have known about Ethan. She began pacing back and forth, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of everything. Finally, she summoned the courage to pick up her phone and try to call me. But the second she turned her phone back on, a flood of messages from me started pouring in. She collapsed onto the floor, the weight of the messages crushing her. The realization that I had understood every single word she said to Ethan in French hit her like a ton of bricks. Thinking back on that night at the party, she felt sick to her stomach knowing that I had been sitting right there while she flirted with another man in a different language. She could only imagine how much pain she must have caused me. I had been right there, forced to listen to my own wife falling for another man while pretending I didn't understand a word. The sheer cruelty of it all was finally starting to sink in for her. She couldn't bear to think about it anymore, feeling as if she were being suffocated by her own guilt. She began frantically searching the house for any sign of me or anything I might have left behind. She finally found a thick photo album in a drawer and felt a brief spark of hope. She thought that maybe she could use our old memories to win me back. But when she opened the book, what she saw inside completely destroyed her. The album that used to be filled with over 1,000 photos of our life together was now completely empty. Every single photo and memory of us had been removed, leaving nothing but empty pages. It was in that moment that she finally realized I was gone for good and that there was no coming back. Ava's nails dug deep into her palms as she tried to process the loss. The sharp pain in her hands helped her regain a shred of focus. She reached out to everyone she knew to try and track my international travel records. She even went so far as to beg my former boss for any information on where I might have gone. But in the end, she found nothing. She tried to think of every possible place I could be, but each lead turned into a dead end. My parents had both passed away in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving me with no other family to turn to, which only made my disappearance more mysterious to her. An hour later, she got a call from the airport saying that there was no record of me leaving the country on that day. The weight of her grief finally became too much to bear. She finally had to accept that I was gone and that she had no way of finding me. She realized she wouldn't even get the chance to apologize to my face. She held the divorce papers and traced my signature with her fingers over and over again, the pain making it hard for her to even breathe. Her tears blurred her vision and soaked the paper, revealing a faint line of text I had hidden. My love was once as deep and silent as the moonlight, but your betrayal turned our eternal vows into nothing but a fading memory. It was in that moment that Ava finally realized just how deeply she had wounded me. I was never coming home. The world began to spin around her, and she collapsed onto the floor. She didn't know how much time had passed before she finally regained consciousness. She tried to block out the memories of the pain she had caused me, but the image of me walking out the door that night kept playing on a loop in her head. There was no doubt in her mind that I had known everything all along. She couldn't understand how I had managed to stay so calm while knowing the truth. I had always been someone who valued loyalty and honesty above all else in a relationship. I had told her on the day we became official that I would always be faithful, but that if she ever betrayed me, I would walk away and never look back. Ava had felt the same way back then, believing that I was the only man she would ever love. But somewhere along the line, everything had started to go wrong. It probably started when she moved to Paris, feeling alone and vulnerable in a foreign country. That was when she met Ethan, and as they spent more time together, their friendship eventually turned into something more. She had slowly forgotten the promises she made to me and allowed herself to be drawn into a relationship with him. She had convinced herself that she could keep her secret forever, and that as long as she was a good wife to me, her time in France would remain buried in the past. She never imagined that Ethan would actually follow her back to the States. Torn between her love for me and her attraction to Ethan, she had spent months struggling to choose between her two lives. Eventually, the truth was bound to come out. I was far too observant not to notice that something was wrong. Her thoughts were interrupted by her phone buzzing with a series of delayed messages from my old number. Her heart pounded as she opened them, hoping to find some sign that I was willing to give her another chance. Instead, the messages she saw were more than she could handle. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the screenshots of every single Facebook post Ethan had made about their affair. She realized that I had seen every intimate moment and every flirtatious comment they had shared. She felt as if the room were closing in on her. She was overcome with rage and immediately called Ethan, demanding to know why he had shared those posts with me when he knew how much our marriage meant to her. Ethan was silent for a moment before telling her that he knew how much I meant to her, but that she was just as important to him. He argued that he only did it because he loved her and wanted her to be with him forever. Ava was horrified, realizing for the first time that Ethan's love was more of a cage than a sanctuary. She told him that she had warned him to stay away from our marriage, and that since he had driven me away, she was going to make sure his life was a living hell. Her anger consumed her as she drove straight to Ethan's house. She pounded on his door and held down the doorbell until he finally answered. Ethan didn't seem surprised to see her, and even had a smirk on his face as he invited her inside. The moment he turned his back, she slapped him across the face with everything she had. Before he could say a word, she told him how much she loathed him for claiming to love her while systematically destroying her life. She went to hit him again, but he caught her wrist and pulled her into a tight embrace. He apologized and insisted that everything he did was out of love for her. He told her that he couldn't stand the thought of sharing her with another man and begged her to believe that he had only acted out of love. Ava gave a cold laugh and told him that while she had once thought she loved him, she realized now how wrong she had been. She realized that she had never truly stopped loving me and that he had always been the only man who mattered. She told him that their relationship was nothing more than a temporary distraction and that it was finally over. Ethan looked devastated as he gripped her shoulders and asked her if she had ever truly loved him at all. Without a moment's hesitation, she told him that he was nothing more than a temporary thrill. Ethan gave a bitter laugh and reminded her that he had given up his entire life in France just to be with her, only for her to tell him that she never cared. Ava looked at the man who had cost her everything and felt nothing but pure disgust. She told him that not only did she not love him, but she was going to make sure he paid for what he had done. She reminded him that she was the only reason he had his job at the Miller Group, and that she could just as easily take it away. Ethan looked panicked as he asked her what she was planning to do. She told him that she was going to strip him of everything he had as retribution for what he had done to our marriage. Seeing that there was no way to change her mind, Ethan finally dropped his act and told her how much she disgusted him. He mocked her for pretending to be a loyal wife when she had been the one who sought him out in the first place. Ava was shocked to hear such cruel words coming from the man she had once considered her friend. Ethan ignored her reaction and told her that she should have seen this coming the moment she decided to live a double life. He argued that he had only played his part and that she had no one to blame for her downfall but herself. Each word Ethan spoke seemed to drain the life out of Ava. He then dropped another bombshell, revealing that I had come to see him after he first returned to the States. He told her that I had begged him to leave her alone, but that they had made a bet on whether she would choose him or me, and it was clear that I had lost. The news hit Ava like a physical blow, and she fled from his house in a state of complete shock. The series of revelations had left her feeling utterly broken. She barely made it out the door before collapsing on the sidewalk, sobbing uncontrollably and not caring who saw her. Over the next few months, Ava did everything in her power to try and find any lead on where I might be. But it was as if I had vanished from the face of the earth. The constant stress and overwhelming guilt eventually took its toll on her health. Meanwhile, Ethan lost his job and was forced to leave Chicago, and word was that he was struggling to make ends meet. 5 years later, my team in London finally finished our long-term research project, and it was finally time for me to head back home. My mentor asked me if I really wanted to go back and offered to help me get a permanent position in London if I chose to stay. I told him that while I appreciated the offer, it had been 5 years and it was time for me to go home. When we returned to the States, we were given the highest honors for our work. The news was all over the media, and we suddenly found ourselves in the national spotlight. I spotted Ava in the crowd almost immediately. I remembered her as having eyes that were always full of life and a certain youthful arrogance. But the woman standing before me now looked tired and worn out, with dark circles under her eyes and a drab coat. The light had completely vanished from her eyes, and she looked as if she might blow away in the wind. She stood there at the edge of the crowd with tears streaming down her face, silently mouthing the words "sorry" to me. Once the interviews were over, she made her way through the crowd toward me with shaky steps. She started sobbing before she could even say a word. She looked so fragile as she stood there crying that I thought she might actually break. I looked at her with complete indifference, feeling absolutely nothing at all. It turned out that time really was the best medicine for a broken heart. I didn't want her making a scene in public, so I just let her follow me to my car without saying anything. She took the tissue I offered and tried to steady her hands as her sobbing finally subsided. She told me through her tears that she had never expected to see me again and that she was so incredibly happy that I was back. She reached out to touch my face, but I pulled away before she could make contact. I adjusted my glasses and looked at her with a cool, detached expression that made it clear we were no longer the same people we once were. She seemed to realize that I wasn't going to let her in, and she quickly pulled her hand back. I asked her if she had come all this way just to see my face. My voice was flat and gave away no hint of what I was thinking. She sniffled and looked as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, clearly wanting to tell me everything she had been through since I left. I had absolutely no interest in hearing her life story. I checked my watch and told her she had exactly 10 minutes because I had a busy schedule and didn't have time for a trip down memory lane. That seemed to snap her out of her crying fit. She told me that she wanted to explain everything that had happened and swore that she was done with Ethan for good. She claimed that the last 5 years had been a nightmare of searching for me while struggling with severe depression and insomnia. She begged me for forgiveness, insisting that she had learned her lesson and that she couldn't imagine a life without me. I looked at her desperate face and couldn't help but find the whole situation ridiculous. I told her that she didn't actually love me. She just couldn't handle the fact that the man who had adored her for 20 years had finally moved on. I compared it to losing a pet you've had for years, saying that she was just struggling to adjust to my absence. After all, I had been a constant presence in her life for as long as she could remember. I told her to stop lying to herself about loving me, because anyone who truly loved me would never have done the things she did. Her sudden realization of my value was nothing more than regret over her own loss. She stood there in silence, looking as if every one of her lies had been laid bare. She finally looked down and admitted that she knew I would never trust another word she said. She accepted that she was responsible for her own downfall and that she deserved whatever consequences came her way. She told me that she hadn't come for forgiveness, but just to see me one final time before moving on. She acknowledged that the damage she'd done had created a rift between us that could never be repaired. She saw me as a success while she saw herself as a complete failure. She said she had no right to ask for anything else, but hoped that I would finally find the happiness I deserved. She told me that it was finally time for her to say goodbye for good. With that, she opened the door and stepped out of the car. I watched her walk away until she disappeared into the crowd. I gave a small smile and drove away without a second thought. I never saw her again after that day. Walking away from the wrong person isn't a loss, it's an act of survival. Every step you take toward healing will eventually lead you to a better place. You truly win at life when you no longer need someone else's apology to feel whole. The peace you feel in your soul is the ultimate reward for everything you've been through.